Hello, and welcome to the third and final class for the Club Angel Pie series. And this class is going to be relatively quick because these are super easy recipes. We are not going to be making all of my pie crust recipes. I have 5. However, I have included all of them in the post below. And they will always stay there, and you can print them out if you want to. And that's the only place from now on you're going to be able to find those recipes. I am not sharing them anywhere else. They are now an exclusive thing. So if you want those recipes, in a binder or something, feel free to print them out. And in the post, you will find the Paleo copycat pie crust recipe, and that is the one that we're making today. You will find my pate brisée, which is like the first one I ever created, and I spent a month on it. And that is like a really beautiful, flaky, classic pie crust. And that one uses sweet rice flour. And then we've got the keto Pillsbury copycat recipe, which was in my last book. That one is also down below. And then let's see, what else do we have? There's the coconut flour pie crust, and then there is the AIP flour pie crust. They are all delicious. They all turn out great. Choose whichever one you want. My personal favorites are the pate brisée and the Paleo copycat pie crust recipe, and that tends to be the most popular one. I don't think a lot of people even know about the pate brisée. Okay, so let's get started talking about ingredients and some tips and tricks. You can do this by hand. I prefer to use my little 14 cup food processor. I've got a Cuisinart one that's like 15 years old now. It's amazing. But you can do this by hand. You have to be very careful that your pie crust doesn't get too warm while you're mixing it together, because that'll screw everything up. You got to keep your ingredients cold. And I like using the food processor because it makes things happen really quickly, and as a result, you've got it into the fridge chilling within a couple of minutes. So let's start with talking about ingredients. Okay, first things first, blanched almond flour. I don't think I really need to say a lot about this. At this point, you guys know probably that there's a difference between blanched and natural almond flour. Natural almond flour still has the skin. Blanched has the skin removed. This used to be kind of hard to come by, but now it's everywhere. I would say every brand pretty much sells it blanched at this point. I buy it at Costco. They have 3-pound bags. They're the best deal I've ever found. So if you have a Costco membership, grab your almond flour there and store it in the fridge, because it's nuts. It goes rancid quicker. If you keep it in the fridge, it's going to last you a really, really long time. All right, so we've got that. And I've got my starch. For this recipe, I went with tapioca starch. And I did that because I find that tapioca has a little bit more like gluiness to it compared to potato starch. I tend to choose potato starch for things that I want to be like fluffier. And I choose tapioca starch for things that I want to have a good like chewiness to, or a good hold. The dough to have a good hold. So I found that tapioca worked best. The closest option for swapping when it comes to tapioca is arrowroot. Arrowroot is a little bit gummier than tapioca even, but it'll work just fine if you want to do that. I would not use potato starch. It's not the best for this recipe. It tends to absorb more liquid, and it may make your pie crust a little bit dry. Okay, we have butter and shortening. I am using Earth Balance's dairy-free butter here. I am myself dairy-free, so that's just my go-to. Make sure you use buttery sticks versus like the spreadable butter. The spreadable butter is going to melt too quickly, and it's not going to give the dough the right structure. So you need to use a dairy-free sub that is in stick form, meant for baking. And then of course you can use regular butter too. I always use salted, which kind of goes against like what a lot of bakers do, but why not? Like, salt makes everything taste better, and it never is going to add too much salt to a recipe, so I don't understand the whole unsalted thing. I think it's silly. So yeah, salted butter. And then for shortening, I mean, of course, you can use just the classic junky, processed oil shortening. That is fine. It works great. But if that's not up to your standards, you have another option. and that is spectrum shortening. This is the best I found. There may be other brands at this point, but this is the easiest one to find. Usually this is sold at Whole Foods, and most healthy grocery stores will have this in their gluten-free or dairy-free section. And yeah, this works great. So you can use this if you want to. Other options include lard. I think lard would work just fine. That's probably it. I would not use, do not use coconut oil. Just don't think it's gonna work. You can't ever sub coconut oil for shortening unless it's like you're frying, but don't do it. Just don't do it. It'll be a disaster. Your dough will fall apart. The reason I use both shortening and butter adds really good flavor, and shortening has a higher melting point. So therefore, it's going to sit in your baked good longer, and it's going to create, since it's in there longer and as the dough begins to rise, it creates little pockets of air. And this is how you get your flakiness. The other reason I like to use shortening is that I find it really helps to hold the dough together really nicely. So that is why we are using both. Don't use all of one or the other, really use both. And I believe there's 4 tablespoons of each one in this recipe. Okay, next thing, applesauce. I actually tested this recipe out with eggs, and it didn't turn out as good years ago. So applesauce I like to use because it adds some moisture, but most importantly, it acts like glue, and it really helps this dough hold together, and it makes it really easy to work with. So applesauce, if you can't have apples, you could use pear sauce, you could do peach sauce. I mean, you may need to make them homemade, but if you have an apple allergy, you can swap that out. And by the way, it doesn't matter if your applesauce has cinnamon in it, just use what you have. It's not gonna make a big difference. And then we have our salts and our xanthan or guar gum. You can use one or the other. For salts, you can use any kind that you want. I always have pink Himalayan on hand. I buy the big things of it at Costco. Love Costco. So I always just go with that. All right, so those are our ingredients, and I think it's time for us to throw this together. Okay, so the next step is to just add all of the dry ingredients to the food processor and to give them a blitz, and then we're gonna add in the butter and process that along with the shortening and the applesauce, and the dough will be ready. Let's get to it. Perfect. All right, so that is well mixed. And next, I'm just going to add my fats. Now you'll notice I cut the butter up into 3 pieces already. You don't have to do that. I just find it like makes it a little easier. And I kind of like to evenly disperse it. And then adding the shortening. Great. And last but not least, our applesauce. Now the key to good pie crust is simply not over mixing the dough. We're going to pulse it once again just until it becomes a cohesive dough. And it's done, just like that. Now you may be looking at this dough thinking that it looks really kind of wet. And that is how it is supposed to be. The next step here is to put this in a Tupperware container and stick it in the fridge for at least an hour or overnight. And as it sits in the fridge, this dough, the flour is going to soak up more and more of that applesauce and dry out. The butter is going to get cold and hard again, which is going to firm up this dough. And then you'll notice in the recipe there's an extra 1/4 cup of starch reserved for later. At that point, after the dough has chilled, I like to mix that starch in or use that starch to roll out the crust. And you really only use it if you need it. The dough chills. I wanted to talk to you about no bake crust, although you can bake them, and some other little tips and tricks. So first, let's talk about the pie crust we just made. One of the things you can do is you can place a large cutting board into the freezer while the dough is chilling, and this will make rolling out really easy. So that's a little hot tip. A lot of people, well, the classic method is to use marble, cold marble, and that is because it holds that coldness really well. I don't have a big piece of marble, so if you don't have a marble and if you don't have a big cutting board, don't worry about it. This dough is very user-friendly. Okay, so next I wanted to talk to you about, I always call them press and crust, but they're technically not press and crust. Press and crust is like an actual pie crust dough that you just press into place. I tend to not want to bother with those because I find them to just be a pain in the butt and more time consuming, honestly. What I am talking about are graham cracker crusts or cereal-based crusts or cookie crusts. And all of these are under the category of no bake, but if you want to toast them up a little bit, you totally can do that. And usually I'll do that in the oven for like 350 for like maybe 10-15 minutes tops. And these are traditionally used for your custard pies, cream pies, anything along the lines of that does not need to be baked, even like a cheesecake that doesn't need to be baked, you would use these different crusts. And I have a basic template for those for you that you don't have to follow exactly. This is a very, very flexible type of recipe. Looking at my notes here, I have some ideas for you. You can use Oreos. The gluten-free Oreos are vegan by default. Obviously gluten-free graham crackers. You can use any gluten-free cereal, Cheerios, Honey Nut Cheerios, Fruity Pebbles, Cocoa Pebbles, Chex, Corn Flakes. Yeah, there's so many different options. Any crispy cookies, you don't want to use any soft cookies, but like a crunchy, crispy, gluten-free cookie you could use. And then you're just going to need like 1.5 to 2 cups of that. And it's the same thing. You throw it into your food processor, or you can use a bag and just pound it out with your hands. You can keep it real simple. And how much you pound it out or blitz it is up to you. If you want it to be a little chunkier, do a little chunkier. If you want more of like a thin crumble type of crust, you can do that. Whatever you want to do. All you're going to do is mix that with about 6 tablespoons of melted butter, or you could use vegan butter, of course, or you could use melted coconut oil for this. I really love butter flavor coconut oil for this. Coconut oil is great because when you put that back into the fridge, that's going to really kind of like help glue the crust together, making it easier to slice and scoop it out of the pan. And then a lot of recipes you'll see include like 1/4 cup of sugar. I think this is honestly totally up to your preference, and I think it's optional. I usually don't bother. I like to keep things a little simpler, but I've seen honey, I've seen maple syrup, I've seen white sugar. A lot of times the graham cracker crusts have a little bit of sugar. The honey and the maple syrup I see as a benefit because it'll kind of help glue everything together. But it's completely optional. It's going to turn out great either way, especially for like a cream pie. That in itself does a really good job of holding the crust together. So that's really all you need to know about that. And I'm putting those amounts in the blog post. And yeah, so really feel free to be creative. Come up with your own pie, however you want to. And make sure that you check out the series Pie 1 class and the Pie 2 class series, because in the first one I went all over crumb toppings, how to make your own crumb topping, which can go on pie. And then the second one I went over all kinds of different fillings, everything from giving you the starch or flour amounts for every possible kind of fruit pie. There's also a gluten-free vegan cream pie base that you can customize to make your own. So between these 3 classes, you can really kind of walk into the kitchen this fall with confidence this pie season and make whatever you want and know that it's going to turn out. All right, so I will be back, and next up is rolling out the Pillsbury pie crust. So you want to cover your surface with a good amount of starch, and I'm just going to use half of the dough here. Half is perfect for the bottom of the pie, and the other half is perfect for the top. Keep this in mind. So if you ever want to double the recipe, it's going to be to make more than one pie or two pies. If one recipe will make two pies if you're only doing a bottom crust and the top is like a crumb topping or something. Okay. I'm going to get into an even ball, sprinkle some more starch on top, and then cover it with a second sheet of parchment and roll it out. Pie crust typically is about 1/8 inch thick, but it does not need to be exact. So I'm gonna go like this, try to get it going in the direction I want it to go. Trust me guys, I am not a pro either. Just wing it as I go. Add a little more starch. And sometimes you gotta just kind of add some dough to the center and start over to try to get a circle. And along the way, if you want a more perfect circle, you can always like grab a pizza cutter. Okay, now we're getting close. So I'm just gonna kind of like fold this in, fold this in. What a mess I am. All right. Remember, it doesn't have to be a perfect circle. It really doesn't. All right, I call this good enough. All right, I got my pie here. The easiest way to go about this is to kind of just like go like that, put it on top, like this, and then flip. And then, carefully, and as long as you've got enough parchment, and your dough is chilled, and you use enough starch, this will peel off without ripping. Pretty good. Little messy right here. So I'm gonna just kind of like press it down. And some sections have more dough than I need, so I'll just break them off, put some here. Like it really, once you get the pie crust in there, once you get the fillings in there, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so then I kind of like to go around and tuck around the top as much as I can. Again, if there's any pieces that are like missing a lot, you can take a little more dough to kind of just fill in those little spots. Oops. You know, and in a perfect world, I would have rolled it out just the right size so I don't have to mess around with any of this, but I'm too ADD for all that. Okay, almost good here. All right, and then of course you can do whatever you want. I'm just going to, you can do this side of the fork, you can do this side of the fork. I'm just gonna keep it real simple. Just go around and crimp it. If you handle this for too long, your butter is going to begin to melt, and and then your dough is going to get harder to work with. So that's another benefit to chilling it for a good amount of time, which is why my dough here is not behaving so perfectly. But that's okay, we will improvise. Of course, you can do other fancier crust toppings. This crust, when it is properly chilled, will do anything and everything that you want it to do. Poke a few holes. Now at this point, you can par bake this crust if you're going to put a cream pie filling in it. I'm forgetting the exact amount of time, but I'd say like 350 for 10 to 15 minutes-ish would be plenty. You don't need to put the beads in here. You don't need to do anything to weigh it down. This is not like traditional pie crust. You can just throw it in the oven just like this. If you are doing a fruit pie, I would recommend pre-cooking your fruit if possible, because this crust having almond flour means that it's going to get toasty sooner than later, quicker than a traditional pie crust would. So either pre-cook your fruit to reduce the amount of time that this crust needs to bake, or just be prepared to throw some tin foil over the whole thing or the edges, probably about 20 to 30 minutes into the baking process. Just keep an eye on that. So yeah, that's it. Now this leftover dough could literally live in the fridge for a week. You could also put it in the freezer, roll it up in good tight little balls, and put it in a baggie, a freezer-proof baggie, or in a container and freeze it. Any dough that doesn't have baking soda or baking powder is going to handle freezing really well, and this dough is no exception. And while you're at it, you should probably taste it because it literally tastes like actual Pillsbury pie crust. So that is it. This is really simple. This is easy. Anyone can do it. Don't be afraid. Give it a try and let me know how it goes. Hope you guys have a great day.